Cambrian intertidal sandstones have lately been receiving unprecedented amounts of attention because of their remarkable ability to preserve a diverse amount of three-dimensional soft-bodied fossils, invertebrate trace fossils, and new arthropods with significantly well-preserved limbs. These arthropods have the right number of appendages to match sub-aerial trackways, which scientists were originally unable to attribute to a specific species. How is sandstone, which is not generally known for preserving fossils, able to capture 3D fossils of arthropods, and what is the significance of those findings? The specimens were found and collected in Mosinee, Wisconsin, Arcadia, Wisconsin, and Miechow-Wolbrom, Quebec. Quartz arsenates and of the three locations were deposited on the margins of a shallow sea. The Elk-bound group, located in Wisconsin, is composed of three units: the Mount Simon, Eau Claire, and Gorzelak formations. These three units display tribulites, agrosplenids, hierolithids, inarticulate brachiopods, and many young trace fossils, preserved in mature quartz sandstone, minor carbonate shales, which suggest offshore and shore-face environments. The Potsdam group of Quebec is sandstone unit, which holds many trace fossils and body fossils of trilobites, preserved in a life position. It also contains clearer quartz sandstones and has coarse and thick mature quartz arenite. Slabs of stone were collected, photographed, grinded, mapped, cast, and described by scientists on the field. If possible, the slabs were cut down to reduce unnecessarily rock to just reveal the wanted fossils. Whereas the preservation of fossils in three-dimensional form is not unique throughout the fossil record, these discoveries are important because three-dimensional preservation is very rare in the Phanerozoic. Both the fossils from Quebec and Wisconsin share key characteristics, including requiring a mud substrate to form a mold of the organisms and being cast in sand. There is a hypothetical taphonomic model that explains how the preserved fossils and the structure they created by moving were formed. The first step involves arthropods being stranded by high water. The arthropods would become stuck in the overbank muds once the rain stopped, burrow into mud, and thus would have allowed clay minerals to coat their bodies, preserving their limbs in 3D. A fresh bed of sand would later be deposited, and since sand has a low angle of internal friction, individual grains could fall into every small cavity and indentation within the organism, helping to create 3D fossils as well. The interesting limbs that were preserved are always found as trilobites reach the end of their trials, suggesting they were trying to burrow to avoid death. This makes it possible that their limbs were elongated by the actions of burrowing, making their limbs look different than they actually look. Since many organisms are preserved in the position that they died in, such a quick fossilization is possible. After examining the many fossils from the Lagerstatte in Quebec and Wisconsin, Aeronostauxis inflata, the earliest known phyllocard, was revealed to be very similar to the modern Leptoscruston form in many aspects, but different with a larger size, flap-like phyllopod expedites. Mosinea, Macnarditota, and Miechow-Wolbrom are also newly discovered arthropods that may contain many traits from the ancestral condition. Similarly, there is significant evidence to suggest they were the species that created the aforementioned tracks, to which no scientist could attribute to a species. The significance of discovering such revolutionary findings in sandy environments, where presentation is not the norm, can help spark more discoveries from scientists. We may start looking for more fossils in sandstone environments and could discover organisms with remarkable preservations. These unlikely Lagerstatte could help fill the gaps we have in understanding Earth's evolution, especially because such sand environments were important in terrestrial animals. A Lagerstatte that was found in Miechow-Wolbrom area of Poland is a crinoid concentration of the late Cretaceous period. What was discovered were free-moving crinoids, chromatoids, and rovicrinoids. Only a few specimens of free-floating crinoids have been discovered in the Albian Cretaceous in Poland. This kind of crinoid has never been discovered or talked about before. The purpose of the presentation is to describe the paleo-environmental effects on the abundance of crinoid discoveries. In October of 2006, limestone deposits that were composed mostly of immoceramid and echinoid debris were discovered. Among all of these echinids, the taxa most widely represented are all Conulus, superchondros, and Dioscides minimus. There are other taxa that are represented in the Lagerstatte, but they are not very important in this presentation. This is because they are less than 15% of the specimens found at the site. Also, when samples are taken from older samples of rocks, unearthed none of the centrodoles of free-moving crinoids found. Only arms and cineral fragments were found. They were not completely free-moving cineroids. In Opal, where Turonian deposits were also found, a Conulus bed was not exposed, and isocrinoids were the only crinoids in the deposit. There were no free-moving crinoids found there, verifying the samples that were taken in Poland. The question being tested is analyzing the discovery of free-floating crinoids in the Lagerstatte in Miechow-Wolbrom, Poland, and to describe the natural effects on the abundance of free-moving crinoids in Poland. The crinoids that were discovered are hemispherical, with a radial dorsal star. The size of the dorsal are 1.8 to 8.1 millimeters. The height is in the range of 0.6 to 0.3 millimeters. The size with the dorsal is flattened, with relatively narrow furrows that are visible between the radial star's rays. The investigated material contains various stages of development of a single species. Rather than the crinoids be considered to be glenotremites, they have stages of different development. The environment preferred by Conulus subrotrundus are shallow seas. Once they had died, their spines fell off, and they lived on the surface of the sea until their bodies were buried. Factors that affect the rate of burial are rate of material accumulation, rate of erosion, and the rate of deposits rich with fossilized organisms in a high-energy system. Most high-energy systems do not yield good sites for fossilization, and the grouping of these crinoids could have been created by an outside high-energy system, like a storm, to bring all the organized together. The date which they were analyzed was October 2006. After the sediments had been collected, they were washed in hot tap water, then sorted by using mesh sizes of 1.0 millimeters, 0.5 millimeters, and 0.315 millimeters. They were dried at a temperature of 140 degrees Celsius, and other material was removed from the specimens. This stir produced nearly 600 specimens of Conulus subrotundras, 60 specimens of Discodens minimus, and 40 other fragments that are not universally one taxa. Never before has a crinoid Lagerstatte ever been discovered from the Mesozoic strata until this discovery. Because of the abundance of crinoids and the abundance of glenotremes, paradoxus, that were recovered from the 30-centimeter slab of limestone, this site can be called a crinoid Lagerstatte, or a glenotrite Lagerstatte. On paleological perspective, the Colonius bed was formed in the shallow sea environment, and describes a typical shallow sea environment for the set time period. Due to plate tectonic movements, two different deeper basins where the shallow sea sediments deposited. Waves would be the primary distribution of uniform deposits of sediments, and would explain why there is such a high percentage of crinoids in this particular site. Shallow sea environments is confirmed with the discovery of cronatuloids. They are stemless crinoids. The abundance indicates that possibly predation intensity could have caused Mesozoic marine evolution. Therefore, predation intensity was not the only factor in controlling these crinoids and their main location for the environment. Environmental factors may have affected the depth at which the crinoids lived. Plate tectonics also created a shallower sea shelf and may have forced other forms of life, like stalked crinoids, into deeper water and allow free-flowing crinoids to stay in the shallow sea water environment. Lago di Pergusa is a major lake in the Italian island of Sicily in the Mediterranean basin. Temperatures are relatively moderate, ranging from -3 to 37 degrees Celsius throughout the year, or about 26 to 98 degrees Fahrenheit. The majority of landscape surrounding the lakes is open and is moderately used, mostly in herbaceous crops and olive groves, but has been home to hominids since the Paleolithic era, including fossils found from the Bronze and Iron Age hominids. Later, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, and Arabs all occupied this area. The data taken during this sample was between current day and 12,000 years ago. Throughout this history, natural and artificial fires used by some of these hominid groups have led to environmental footprints visible today. So what are these footprints, and how do they prove, indicate, and preserve the manifestation of fires in this region during the Holocene? Two of the most useful methods to analyzing these fires include microcharcoal data, which is found in soils and other sediments and documents the presence of fires, and pollen data, which suggests the presence of flowers and other vegetation and the reduction of fires. Wind and other environmental effects can affect both of these data sources because of the uplift of molecules that can be deposited and stored in low deposits in lakes or opposite bank sides where the fire didn't occur. Of the methods used to analyze this data, there are three major methods. First is the particle abundance method, in which charcoal molecules are measured based on the number found. The size class method documents the area or length to organize the data. The third method, or the point count method, examines the abundance of the charcoal molecules in random points of the area. For the sake of this paper and the study, the researchers used a variety of these three methods: counting number of particles, analyzing the length by shortest axis of the microcharcoal, and sorting them into different classes, and estimating how close the particles were to the fire. What the researchers found was that in the last 1,000 years has been a transition period related to interglacial reforestation. Other climatic events, including increasing humidity, which began about 10,700 years ago, and since about 3,000 years ago, there has been evidence to suggest aridification, or very dry conditions. This could imply the effect that humans have on Earth's climate change. Waves of natural fires have been historically very constant in this area, but the recent changing climate, in parallel with the rise of humans and their influence, the research suggests should be taken into account. The weather patterns in the Holocene do not match up with the levels of fire during this recent time. This changing climate has gravely affected the vegetation and natural ecosystems of Lago di Pergusa. Follow-up studies pertain to an archaeological curiosity about what human civilizations lived in the area, as well as the effect of glacial reforestation in the area.
Each of these presentations are examples of fossil ecosystems in different time periods, representing both continental and marine environments. All three suggest the importance of fossil preservation based on the environmental effects, such as unique locations, ocean movement, and climate change.